been asking a lot from what I've seen from various, in terms of wanting some sort of comprehensive game down or how to get good, as they say. And I haven't seen a whole lot of those sort of videos floating around yet. So I figured I might as well do one and try to include as much information as I can, but try to keep it to the important stuff. And so before we even get into like actually pushing buttons at enemies, there's a couple important concepts that we need to know, and one basic term that we need to know. So if we look at our weapon loadout, your weapon loadout is basically going to be where the sort of most depth of the weapon system in Nier Automata is going to be happening. You've got two different weapon slots. You've got your light attack and your heavy attack. And then within each category, there's 4 different weapon types. There's small swords, large swords, spears, and combat bracers. Each one of these weapon types is going to come with their own series of combos for both light attacks and heavy attacks. So each small sword is going to have a different series of combos when you mash your light attack button, and then each small sword is also going to have a different combo when you mash the heavy attack button. So just for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to equip a light attack small sword, and then I'll also do a heavy attack small sword. Oh. There we go. So, when we use the small sword for our light attack, we get that. But then when we use a light sword for our heavy attack, and so every weapon in the family is going to have the same combo. So if I were to flip these weapons where I put my current heavy weapon into the light weapon slot, it would be the exact same attacks. There is going to be one key difference though, and this is going to be where you start to differentiate which weapons you want in which slot. If you look in my stats here, underneath the name of each weapon, so underneath Ancient Overlord and underneath Virtuous Contract, there's going to be 2 stats which are going to be attack and combo. Combo is the important one here. Obviously attack is going to be important, but combo is going to be a pretty big factor. Every weapon has a sort of chain of combos that can go up to a certain number of hits, but each weapon will only be able to go so far in that grand chain. And so if you look at the combo level on the Ancient Overlord, it says LT4, that means light combo 4. So this one can only go 4 attacks into the light combo, whereas it's HV2, which means it's got 2 heavy attacks. So I'm going to go out of this menu, and I'm going to show you the 4-hit combo for the Ancient Overlord, which is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to switch these weapons. And this was an LT of 5, so it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 5. And that's going to be the same for light weapons and heavy weapons. So if you notice after each sort of series of combos, there's a sizable break afterwards where we get our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here, there's a gap. Right here. There's also a gap in between our heavy attacks, like this, right here, right after the throw, where we've got a long time where we can't do anything. And so in order to minimize the gap, the game wants you to combo your square button and triangle button presses, or your light attacks and heavy attacks. So if you look at the difference between our heavy attack, the gap afterwards where we're able to start another combo of heavy attacks, where this is one combo, waiting, and then to start the second. If we combo heavy attacks into light attacks, we can immediately combo into light attacks, and then you can also immediately combo into heavy attacks. And you can keep this chain going indefinitely, where you're just able to constantly throw out attacks as fast as you can. There's also one other way to combo. In addition to button presses where you get combos off, like I said, the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, that's if I'm pushing the button. If you hold down the button, you'll also get a series of combos, which are completely different from your original combos for both light attacks and heavy attacks. Here's the short sword light pressed combo. So as you can see, really significantly different. Here's the heavy small sword combo, where you've got that stab. It's also to be noted, by just holding this button down, we can't combo into anything. So even if I'm holding this button down, after this attack, we're out. It is possible to chain your held combos together, although there is an actual timing window to it, whereas if you're just pushing the buttons, you can just mash it basically as fast as you can and you'll always combo. So for example, you want to press if you're starting off with a light combo, you want to start holding your triangle combo just before the last sort of millisecond even of your light attack. So I'm going to go light held into heavy held here. Like that, and then even we can go back into the light combo after the heavy thrust. So there are only 2 weapon types out of the 4 that actually have heavy held combos. All weapons have light held combos as well as light tapped combos, but if you switch to either a large sword or a spear, instead of getting a triangle held combo, we get this, which is a charged attack. Now, if I'm not fighting against an actual enemy, that attack looked pretty weak where it was held for a long time, but I only got off 2 hits. But I'm gonna drop down here, and I need to go back up to the rooftop. I'll show you what happens when you actually hit an enemy with a charged attack, because the behaviors are very different. Can I actually get up here? Maybe not. I'll have to fight one of these enemies down here. I'll hit this guy over here with a charged attack. Bait him over. Hold. Oop. These guys are a little too aggressive. Can't get a hit off on these nerds. That happens, where you get much more hits off. And so that's usually the benefit of a charged attack, where if you're just sort of trying it out on nothing, like up here, like I've been doing, you're not going to see the real benefits of a charged attack, but you will see the benefits of a charged attack when you're actually hitting someone. The other big reason to use charged attacks is because there's chips in this game. Chips are something I'll get into a little bit more in a second, but just since we're talking about charged attacks right now, one of the chips you can get is called Charge Attack Plus, which increases the power of your charged attack. Even at +1, the normal level is at so many pluses or numbers next to it, but even a Charge Attack +1 only takes 9 of your chip slots, and it brings your damage to 140%. In terms of efficiency, in terms of how much damage you get per chip size, 140% damage is actually incredibly high. Charge attacks are really situational though, as you just saw, where I was only able to get them off when I was holding really still and the enemies were also not engaging me at all. But the trick is that there are multiple different sorts of chips in the game that you can use that sort of synchronize with each other, and you can build basically a meme build, where one of the things you'll get later in the game is a taunt, which if you have a taunt chip, you can taunt by mashing the L3 stick, but if you eventually, I don't want to spoil anything, but eventually you'll have the ability to sacrifice your held square button light attack for a taunt, and you can get a taunt chip that's pretty effective that will bring your overall damage dealt to 250%, and then if you get that on top of another charged attack chip, which brings your charged attack to like another 250%, you'll be doing an insane amount of damage. And so you can build setups that will cause you to deal unreal amounts of damage with the charge attack, but I think charge attack are something that are very sort of situational. I barely ever used them in my first playthrough, but the gameplay differences you'll notice between normal, which is what I played through the first time on, and hard or very hard, things get a lot different, and so I'm finding more uses for different tools in my arsenal as I'm going. So the other thing we need to talk about in terms of light attacks and heavy attacks, there's one more thing that we need to keep in consideration. So I've got a light weapon, or a light sword equipped in my light attack space now, and then a heavy attack, or a large sword in my heavy attack slot. And so this large sword has a hit marker of 2 heavy hits, and then my light sword has 5 hits. So I'll do a 7-hit combo total, where 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then combo into triangle, which is 6, and then 7. I'll show it off one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Or that might even have been 7 and then 1 extra press. But so this is the combo that you get when you have light sword in the main hand and then heavy sword in the heavy attack slot. If I switch my heavy attack weapon to a small sword, I'll get a totally different combo once I start going into my heavy attacks. But if I then switch my light attack weapon into a heavy sword, my light attack combo will be different. But then once I try chaining that into a triangle combo, the light attack combo stays the same. So each weapon has a light attack combo and a heavy attack combo that interacts with your other weapons. So if you're using I'll use the small sword heavy combo, for example, you'll see you like dual wield the sword and the small sword like this, where you've got one in each hand. Or that's only after you combo. Yeah, like this. So your combos are also different, I should mention, I guess, based upon whether or not you're using them from a normal stance like this. So this combo, where you can see I just do a lot of throwing, whereas the combo will be different after I get out of a heavy sword combo. But that combo I do with my small swords, this one right here, this one will be the same no matter what my main hand weapon is. And so trying to figure out which combos work well together and which ones sort of give you the effects that you're looking for are one of the huge factors that come into picking which weapons you want in the game. Just for example, I'm going to show this one off because this is pretty neat. This is a combo that I think a lot of people haven't explored. I think most people are pretty interested in the light sword as your main hand weapon, but if you use heavy sword as your main hand weapon and then spear as your side weapon, you do this, which is awesome, and I don't think enough people use this combo, and so I'm really pushing for this one. There's one other huge sort of thing that I don't think almost anyone has explored with this game, or most people just playing through casually, I don't think have figured it out yet, and that's about aerial combos. I know everyone pretty much knows how to attack in the air, where I've got my heavy sword in my main hand, and then I've got my spear in my offhand. So if I jump in the air and smash the square button for my light attacks, I'll do an air combo. I'm actually going to switch to small sword, just so a combo is more appropriate a word for what we're doing here. So this is an air combo. So that's a solid like multi-hit air combo. That's if I jump and use light attack. That's going to be for any weapon where you'll do a sort of combo in the air. For any weapon where you jump and then hit the heavy attack button, you'll do a ground slam. But like I said, each weapon's combo is going to be different. So I'm going to switch my main hand to spear, and then I'll switch my offhand to large sword. And so the aerial spear combo I get is very different from the aerial small sword combo I get, and then my aerial heavy sword ground slam is sort of similar to the spear ground slam, but there's only so many ground slams you can actually do, but each one is different. Thing is, and most people probably have not been using this that much, when you get to hard and very hard, this is an absolutely essential skill. You can actually knock enemies into the air intentionally and air combo them. I know most people probably know how to do knocks into the air through the perfect finisher, but if you jump in the air, like I said, if you jump in the air and hit the triangle button, you'll do a ground slam. If you use the heavy attack right after you jump, you'll do an upward sort of upswing and you'll knock enemies into the air like this. So that will knock enemies up to where you're hitting them. And so if you jump, immediately heavy attack, you can get off a small sword combo in the air and then finish up with a ground slam like this. Up in the air combo, ground slam finisher. That is absolutely essential for boss enemies that are roughly humanoid or about your size that can be knocked around like that, because if you knock an enemy into the air, they're stuck there. There's nothing they can do. If you're still like early on in the game, the first real boss you fight in the desert area, try this against him, because I guarantee you'll just destroy him. So again, it won't work with a light attack. So if I do the same timing with the jump attack, I jump and I hit square, it'll do the air attack even though I'll be like functionally on the ground. So it only works with a heavy attack. The thing is that also each weapon has a different upswing. The one that I've seen the most people using, because I've seen some people doing challenge runs where they only play without pod fire. I've seen a lot of people using the small sword aerial knockup because it throws them in the air, and then it does a really solid ground slam combo where it's, aside from the other weapons, it's really quick. I think a lot of people use this sword in general. The reason a lot of people end up using this sword is because another factor that is going to determine what weapons you're going to want to use are weapon attributes. So if you'll notice on my bare fists, I've got attack 100, combo light 4, heavy 1. Down here, I've got attack 270 to 324, combo light 5, heavy 2. I've also got attack speed up. Those, managing which sort of attributes you want, because the weapon attributes will apply to both handed weapons. So for example, if I've got my heavy weapon as this weapon with attack speed up, and I've got the light attack in my fists, my light attacks will be faster also. Even if I don't have an attack speed up on this weapon, as long as I've got this in my heavy slot, my light attacks are going to be faster. If you've got this weapon equipped in your heavy slot, and then you have a second weapon with attack speed up in your light attack slot, they stack, and so your attacks will be unbelievably fast. The reason that this sword is so popular is because it's really easy to upgrade in the beginning of the game, and at level 2 it comes with attack speed up, which is massive, and so this tends to be a favorite weapon for most people when playing through the game because it's really easy to upgrade. In my first playthrough, it was the first weapon I got to level 4, and I got it to level 4 pretty quickly, and so that is a huge sort of boost to you. A couple other weapons that I want to note for being sort of particularly useful. Every single weapon in the game will have 2 different attributes on it when you hit level 4 of that weapon. At level 2, all weapons will have 1, but once you hit level 4, every single weapon will have 2. So in that regard, there's no weapons that are just plain out bad because they don't have an attribute. One of the weapons are a couple of the machine weapons, particularly the machine axe, which is a weapon I really like for its finisher move. And I just like everything about the machine axe. It's available really early on in the game. You can get it from the Pascal's Village, one of the vendors there. Great weapon. Once it hits level 4, you get a special attribute that causes you to permanently gain bonus damage per enemy you slay with the axe. And the cap ends at like 500 kills. So for 500 kills, you're getting bonus damage per person. I don't know exactly what the math is, but it definitely, you can feel the significance of it as you're going through. To make up for that, the second attribute it has is a discount skill, which means that you pay less at shops, which, you know, is useless once you get later in the game where you have infinite money. But that's one thing that they use to sort of like balance out not just different weapons across like small swords, heavy swords, spears, and punches, but also just weapons between like in those categories. So picking out 2 weapons that you really like and that really work well together is something that's really beneficial. The other thing that you really need to take into consideration, and this is also a huge gameplay mechanic that you need to master, is pulling off perfect dodges and then going into finishers. So I'm on hard mode for this just so I can show off all these so the enemies have a little bit more health, but let me show off what a perfect dodge is. You've probably been dodging a lot, which is this, and moving around like this all the time. Even though it's slower than sprinting, it looks faster and it feels faster and it's more fun, but I promise you sprinting is actually faster. This is a dodge, and if an enemy attacks you or you get into a damage zone when this is happening, you'll perform a perfect dodge, which what will happen is you'll disappear temporarily and then you'll reappear and you'll be able to perform a finisher. Each of the 4 weapons has a different finisher, so all the short swords have the same finisher no matter if they're in your main hand or offhand. All the heavy swords will have the same finisher no matter if they're in your light attack or heavy attack slot. And so I'm going to show you perfect dodges where once you see the glow and you see him get up in the air, that's when you're going to want to start moving. You can also chain perfect dodges together. Oh, I actually walked into that attack. I'm an idiot. but the sort of timings and the zones on these are pretty lenient. What I'll do sometimes, because finishers are such sort of effective attacks, is I'll dodge into enemy attacks only so I can perfect dodge back out and then hit them with the finisher. So here's the part where I'll show off all 5 finishers. There's 4 weapon types, but there is a hidden 5th finisher. I don't know if it's hidden, but most people probably don't know about it. So here is the fist finisher, where you basically single target, you knock back an enemy in front of you, and you knock him back pretty far. I don't like this one personally because it doesn't have any AoE to it, and it puts you in a sort of stationary position where enemies can possibly hit you after you're coming out of the finisher, and that's a bad situation to be in. Here's the sword. Knock enemies into the air, and you do the ground slam. Here is a fun thing I found out about the sword finisher, where if you do the sword finisher, knock the enemy up in the air, you can do the thing I showed you earlier where you knock an enemy into the air like this. You can do it again while you're already in the air and hit them up into the air a second time and then pull off another full aerial combo on them, which is huge. That is actually like so useful that when I found that out, I've been basically using it nonstop. So I'm trying to be more creative in the weapons I'm using, but the short swords are just so sort of functional that it's been really tough to sort of drag me away from using them just because they're really good. So I've got my second weapon set, which is going to be the sword and spear weapons, which I'll show off here. The spear one I think also is particularly good. That's the heavy sword. The heavy sword, it attacks in like a cone in front of you. So you saw I was able to hit that guy, but I missed this guy beside me. It also has a pretty solid knockback to it. The spear one is a full 360 knockback, where it'll knock enemies about as far back as that, and it'll knock back every enemy in a full circle around you back that far. So that's the 4 weapon ones. There is a 5th one where instead of using a weapon button, you're going to want to attack with your pod attacks being default R1. You're going to use a pod attack right after the perfect dodge, just like you would a normal weapon timing, and you'll shoot him like a bomb, except that attack missed. There we go. And that does a pretty solid amount of damage, although you can't really combo off of it. The other big issue with that attack is it puts you in a standing state afterwards, which, just like the fist attack, puts you in a really bad spot in order of enemies possibly hitting you. A lot of enemies have attacks where instead of being like these axe attacks where it's like a singular point of action where you can really easily dodge it, that's why I'm fighting these enemies intentionally, is because it's really easy to sort of see where their attacks are coming from. A lot of enemies will have these attacks where they like spin their arms or something, and there's no like singular instant of being hit, and so it's really easy to where if you're in one of those neutral states where if you're just finishing up a spear or if you're just finishing up a fist finisher, you're just standing there, it's really easy to get hit by them and you won't be able to chain a perfect dodge into them. And so that's why I sort of tend to stray away from the finishers that leave you in neutral states or ones that don't have good knockback, because a lot of times this game throws multiple enemies at you at the same time and you'll need to be able to use that AoE from your finishers in order to sort of get out of a situation of you being totally surrounded by enemies. One thing I'm just going to show off here is I'm going to wait for this guy to go down. This is the knock-up skill, where again, not many people know about that one, but it's great. The other thing is that you have your pod special fire, which is default the laser. There's other pod programs you can buy, but I've also found out that not a lot of people know that you can actually charge the pod attacks, and there are 4 different pods in this game that each have a sort of different effect. This one is a Gatling gun pod. Later you'll get a missile pod. If you hold and you charge the pods, each one will do something differently. The laser pod that I've got right now will do a stronger attack, and other ones, I know for example, the missile pod will, if you charge it, like 2 more pod illusions will appear and you'll be able to get more damage off on them. And so charging your pod attacks is also something that I think is sort of an underrepresented mechanic that is sort of important to know, especially when you're trying to get off as much damage as you can. There's one thing I sort of want to talk about that is a little bit dumb, but it's going to be helpful. Oh, actually, since these enemies are here, I can just talk about this now. Enemies that fire bullets. These light bullets, you're able to just shoot down with your pod, but you'll also be able to destroy them with your sword. So like you saw, I knocked that one out of the air. Even though these enemies have a sort of set pattern, like almost like a rhythm game sort of thing, a rhythm to shooting out the little bullets, I find it's almost never a good idea to be trying to melee them in a sort of rhythm where I'll hit them with a melee attack as soon as they start firing their bullet, and that way I'll destroy it. Because even on normal mode, where I'm playing on hard mode now, 99% of the time I found that I end up just getting hit anyways, and it's never really worth it just for the amount of damage you're getting. So for enemies that basically only serve as like bullet spam enemies, I tend to just hit them with the pod. I'm trying to look around for another enemy to fight that is one of the more biped human enemies, and it might take me a second, but I guess while I'm running there I can talk about two other things that I want to talk about. I'm going to show off counter chips in a minute here. Counter chips you can get pretty early on in the game. The first place you'll have access to them is actually oh, hold on, I gotta unequip my chips. The counter chip is available pretty early on in the game, as soon as you basically have access to the desert region, which is where I'm going to go here, only because I know there's humanoid enemies this way, where I can fight them and show off a couple things. The vendor up here will sell you the counter chip. The counter chip is very poorly explained in-game, and I only recently just sort of figured out how it works. That's the guy that will sell you a base counter chip, so you don't have to try to like wait until you find one in-game. But the counter chip is very poorly explained in-game. What you want to do when you've got the counter chip is, well, I guess what the counter chip is, if you've ever played Metal Gear Solid Rising, it's the parry counter from Metal Gear Solid Rising, basically is what it is. I've never played that game, and so I had no sort of frame of reference for it, but there is a guy I'm going to fight with this counter chip. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the settings down to easy, so that way I'm going to take damage here intentionally. So that way I can show this off. So what you want to do is when the enemy is coming to hit you, you're going to want to hit the left analog stick, and you're going to want to poke it in the direction that the enemy is attacking you from, right when the attack is about to hit. So not like that. Like that. And you want to do it once they're like really close to their animation. Now, like that. Like once their fist is basically on top of you. Honestly, I'm pretty bad at countering because I'm not used to it, but countering also gives you some invincibility frames. I barely ever countered in my first playthrough, and so I'm honestly still getting used to it myself. But this is generally how counters work. One of the big reasons to counter is that you can perform a finisher immediately after countering. Hold on. Like that. So you can perform a finisher immediately after countering. I'm not doing a ton of damage because countering is supposed to be you reflecting damage back at the enemy. I'm not doing a lot of damage because I'm playing easy mode. And so if I were playing on harder difficulties, I'd be reflecting a higher portion of damage. But the other thing that I just want to talk about briefly, and this will be the last sort of thing I talk about before we conclude this video, is claw grip. And I know claw grip is something that's really stupid, and it's for like absolutely maximizing your gameplay. But if you are used to it and you've played games like Monster Hunter where it really benefits you to use claw grip, you might like it in this game too. One of the late game, I guess it's not even late game, one of the attributes you can, each enemy has like a sort of buffer number where after dealing a certain amount of damage to an enemy, they'll get staggered no matter what they're doing. So they could be mid-attack and you'll stagger them, or they could be just standing there, and you'll continually stagger them and they'll never get a shot off. And it's a damage counter, so it's based on damage you do. Stun up will lower the damage counter for each enemy, and here's a way to sort of push it to the next level, where if you're on any difficulty above normal, you can't lock on. And so if you do claw grip, what I've got right now is I have my right thumb on my analog stick so I can move the camera. I've got my right index finger on the square button so I can use combos. I'm going to switch to I'm going to switch to light weapons for this. And then I've got my right middle finger on the R1 button so I can constantly fire while also busting off combos. And that's going to augment my damage, which means I'm going to be able to stagger enemies way easier. So it'll turn out like this. Where it's just a really good way to sort of add a little bit onto your damage. It's really effective. I would say the number one place to claw grip, and it's not even that bad, is again against bosses where you can both melee attack them and ranged attack them at the same time. Some enemies you can only attack with ranged attacks, like I'm thinking of the tutorial boss, or the intro boss I should say. But during the shmup sections where you're on the 360 view, where you can aim the direction of your sword slashes and bullets, I claw grip in those sections so that way I can do the same thing I'm doing here, where I'm getting sword attacks off and then also melee attacks off. I guess the sort of last piece of advice I'll give is just in terms of generally how you want to go about fighting enemies in harder difficulties, because the sort of whole deal with this game, I don't want to say the whole deal, but the number one sort of aspect of this game is that this game tends to throw multiple enemies at you at a time. And so dealing with multiple enemies is going to be crucial to your success in actually getting through this game, because it's very, very few times where you'll be fighting just like one-on-one really hard enemy. A lot of times it's going to be you versus horde of enemies, and so getting used to fighting these hordes of enemies are going to be really important for your success. And so I'm going to just give you some general advice on how to approach fighting multiple enemies. First things, I gotta find a group of enemies, which will be out here. Generally what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to try to maintain camera control. The number one reason you're going to die in this game is because either you don't see an attack coming, whether that being because it comes from off screen or the enemy just hits you really quickly and you're not ready for it. Or the second reason you're going to die is, well, actually no, that's the primary reason you're going to get hit in this game, is because you don't see an attack coming and you're just plain old not ready for it. So I'm going to find this group of enemies over here, and I'm going to show you how to sort of keep things in control. Where I've got enemy right here. I'm going to try to drag this guy over here. Actually, I think this area will work out more, because this works out better versus human enemies. So I'm going to drag this guy this way. Try to get this guy interested at the same time, and then also this guy. So if I try to fight this guy like this, which seems really natural, just fighting an enemy one by one, I've got other enemies that are shooting bullets at me from behind me. And so the big key to success is trying to keep all the enemies sort of in your range of motion and in your field of view at the same time, so that way you have an idea. That spinning arm move is one of the things I talked about earlier, where that attack will give you damage if you're unlucky sitting at a neutral position after a finisher, like the fist finisher. So that's why I don't like it. So you want to stay on the outside, and this is a really simple fight with easy enemies, and so it's not going to look like this is really important to success in this game, but this is generally what you want to do in the harder difficulties in order to make sure that you're coming out alive. Is you're going to want to wait for an opening where you're basically just baiting out an enemy attack. You've got one that's easy to dodge, you pull off a finisher, you drop it, and then that'll isolate enemies. And so that knocked that one clear back, which gave me a clear opportunity to hit the one in front of me. And so now that I've got enemies isolated and it's just one left, I can just finish this guy off really easily. But a big portion of this game, in terms of making sure you don't get overwhelmed, is going to be camera control and positioning control, and just making sure that you're able to know where all your enemies are at one time. And so that basically covers up everything I want to be talking about in this game. And so once you
once you get a feel for how combat works in this game, it's a ton of fun, and it's actually surprisingly deep. It's way deeper than I thought it was going to be. And so I hope that some of this advice helps you, and I hope you learned something, but that is going to be it for this sort of tutorial on the basics of combats. And so thanks for watching.